Vaccines cause autism. Wind energy is causing cancer. Right-wing wackos? Well, our next guest says these sentiments are alive and well on the left as well. Joining us now in Los Angeles, California, here's Michael Shermer. He's publisher of Skeptic magazine and a columnist for Scientific American. And we want to remind our audience, as we welcome Michael to the program, that you can be part of this conversation. Our producers Naveen Vaswani and Sandra Jonas are hosting a Twitter chat right now. So send us your thoughts via Twitter and use the hashtag AgendaTVO. Michael, it's good to welcome you to the program. And in doing so, I want to just start by reading an excerpt of something from a publication called Science Left Behind, written by Alex Barizo and Hank Campbell. And it goes like this. By the modern era, super-rationalist progressives who once had held an almost religious belief in the power of science to create a utopian future, had now largely left science behind. Lacking an emphasis on objective fact and focused primarily on legislating ideology and fighting anything that disagreed with cherished ideas, progressives became, as we know them today, unscientific, while claiming the mantle of modernity, denizens of a world where science is replaced by feel-good fallacies. Let's get into this. How exactly are progressives, or those on the left, unscientific in their ideology?
Right. Well, first of all, I wrote that column based on that book in Scientific American, largely because for the past 10 years or so, I've been pounding on Republicans pretty hard on their anti-science attitudes, particularly against the theory of evolution and global warming. And I got a lot of mail, saying, hey, what about, people on the other side? They can be anti-scientific. So people were sending me lots of examples. And when I saw this book, I thought, yeah, I should try to be a little fair here and, dish it out to the other side as well, because nobody has a monopoly on truth and nobody's free of political bias for sure, including myself. So it's good to, I think, to sort of spread the skepticism around. And in particular, I would agree with that sentiment you just read there from the book, and just sort of look at the larger picture that, like in that very issue of evolution, for example, there are, of course, creationists on the one side, on the Republican side, who don't believe in evolution at all. But on the other side, there's what I call cognitive creationists. That is, people who don't believe that evolution applies from the neck up. That is, they pretty much think that the mind is a blank slate, almost entirely constructed by culture, by the environment. And this is simply not true. These evolution wars about the mind have been fought out over the last 20 years. In fact, it was over almost a century and a half since Darwin published The Origin of Species that it was actually acceptable to claim that the human brain evolved just like the rest of the human body, and that the brain as an organ is like any other organ in the body. It evolved for a particular purpose, to solve problems in the ancestral environment. That was controversial all the way up until just recently. In fact, it's still kind of controversial. So that idea, the blank slate, I consider that to be largely an anti-science attitude, and that attitude is almost entirely held by people on the left. Now, I want to make another important point, that when people attack Republicans, really what they're attacking is people on the far right, because most Republicans accept most of science. It's the extremists on the right. And on the left, most people on the left accept most of science. So what we're mostly talking about here is the extreme left, or what are called progressives, roughly speaking. So I think it's good to identify that, because, in fact, as I showed in my column, 41% of Democrats don't accept evolution. So, and 19%, almost, this is a recent Gallup poll, 19% of Democrats don't accept global warming as real and caused by humans. That's almost 1 out of 5. So if liberals are the so-called people of the science book, those numbers are not especially encouraging. So I think it's good to be fair, to look at the political bias on both the left and the right.
Fair enough, and we actually have a chart which emphasizes a little more about what you just said. And Control Room, let's bring this up if we can. These are the views of, as you can see, we've broken them into 4 different groups. Members of the general public, Democrats, Republicans, and then the Tea Party, that extra special feature of American political life these days. And here are their reviews as reflected by the red and blue bars on climate change and evolution. And you can see members of the general public, 69% believe the Earth is getting warmer, only 57% believing humans have evolved. 81% of Democrats say Earth is getting warmer, 64% say humans have evolved. 49% of Republicans, showing the skepticism on climate change here, believe the Earth is getting warmer. Only 45% believe in evolution. And among Tea Party types, only 41% believe that the Earth is getting warmer, and 43% believe in evolution. You see the source at the bottom of the graphic there. So I appreciate your desire to sort of be an equal opportunity chastiser, if you like, of those who
skeptic.
Yeah, skeptic. Okay, that's the better word to use, picking up on the name of the magazine. But let's use a couple of other examples if we can. We talked about vaccines causing autism off the top. We talked about wind farms causing cancer. These are some of the things we hear nowadays. Give us some other examples of that fringe on the progressive left, whom you find to be as anti-science as that fringe on the far right, if you will.
Right, like the following movements are largely led by people on the left, or the far left, progressive, say, anti-vaccination, anti-fluoridation, anti-nuclear, anti-coal, anti-natural gas, anti-hydroelectric, anti-wind, and anti-GMOs, or genetically modified organisms. Now, again, not everybody on the left, just again, these extreme left progressives who seem to have more interest in a political agenda that has to do more with like returning the Earth or returning humanity to a natural state of things, in which you really have to deny a certain amount of science showing that these things are actually not as bad as what people on the extreme left think they are. For example, the anti-vaccination movement, almost nobody on the right championed that. That was almost entirely a far left movement. The anti-fluoridation, same thing. I haven't met a single Republican who agrees with that. Coal, of course, coal is bad for the air, but what are alternatives? Well, okay, so wind. Oh no, wind is bad because the blades kill birds. Okay, what about natural gas? Oh no, natural gas is bad because it also contributes in a smaller way than coal, but still to global warming. Well, what about hydroelectric dams? Oh no, those are bad because they mess up rivers and lake ecosystems. That's true. And what about nuclear? Well, because of the nuclear waste, and so on. So the question becomes, okay, if you could marshal data to show all those things are bad, well, then what are we supposed to do? Well, on the very far left, of course, the answer is we should have far less people. But and that actually is happening. But we're never going back to a globe with, say, 10 million people. You know, we have 7 billion. We're not going back. We may go back down to 6 or 5 billion by, say, 2150 or 2200, but we're never going back to 10 million where we can all live off the land and so forth. And so I find those attitudes, I don't know what you want to call them, anti-science or anti-progress or anti-human, they're anti-something, and they're almost always led by people on the far left.
So is part of the point you're trying to make today that it is the far right is getting a bit of a bad break from mainstream media because we tend to focus on, I want to be careful what word I use here, but you hear this expression about the loony left all the time, and then whatever the equivalent is on the right. Do we have to make sure that we shed equal disdain for the far left as the far right?
I don't think we need to be disdainful on either side. I think it's important to pull back and take a bigger picture look at why people believe what they believe. I mean, this is what I do for a living. I wrote a book called Why People Believe Weird Things. I mean, this is what I do. Why do people believe this or that? And they have reasons. And we have this sort of moralization gap between the people that agree with us, who we think are the good guys, the moral people, and the people that are on the other team, the other side, the other tribe that we disagree with, and they are bad, they're evil. And both sides do this. We all do this, and it's hard not to do that. And so this is why I like, and I've cited many times, Jonathan Haidt's research. I think you've had Jonathan on the show before, on looking at the 5 moral foundations and how liberals and conservatives differ on to what extent they emphasize these 5 different moral dimensions. And it's not that the right is always left, or the right is always wrong, the left is always right, or sort of a funny way to put it, but it's that they emphasize different things. I mean, so the right tends to emphasize things like rule of law, nationalism, national pride, family, group cohesiveness, obedience to authority to a certain extent. Under certain conditions, those are all good things. Under other conditions, they may not be so good. It depends on the context. And the left emphasizes more these moral values of the protection of individuals, the harm care, that we take care of people that can't take care of themselves. We make sure people are not harmed and so forth. Those are also good moral values that many people on the right embrace, but they often don't embrace them to the extent that they embrace those other moral values having to do with, say, group cohesiveness or the rule of law. And so again, there's this constant tension. And in my latest book, The Believing Brain, I actually conclude that it's possible, because of our human nature, in which we have all 5 of these moral dimensions, that we will always have something like a two-party system, or at least a bunch of parties that cluster toward the left and the right, in which you have this sort of tension, in which you have one side that wants change and to upset the apple cart of social order, and the other side that wants to maintain, the conservatives. They want to conserve the social order. And it could be that it's good to have both of those keeping each other in check so that neither side goes too far. And so, our current politics that always seems so bellicose and so just hostile and angry. And in fact, I'm now old enough to know that there's really nothing new in the current battles, that it was always nasty. It's always been nasty like that. It was like that in the 60s with Johnson and Nixon. It was like that in the 1860s with Lincoln and what he had to go through to pass the abolitionist, the amendment to ban slavery, sorry. It's always been that way. Maybe it always will be that way because of our human nature.
Okay, that's a nice setting of the table, because we're going to add another voice to our discussion now. In Oxford, England, via Skype, let's welcome Mark Linus to the program. He's an environmental activist and the author of The God Species: How the Planet Can Survive the Age of Humans. Mark, how are you doing all the way overseas? Good to have you on the program.
Thank you very much. I'm absolutely fine. How are you?
Terrific. I want to start by just playing some tape of you. This was you at the Oxford Farming Conference in the United Kingdom last month. We'll play a clip and then come back and chat. Roll tape, please.
I want to start with some apologies, which I believe are most appropriate to this audience. For the record, here and up front, I want to apologise for having spent several years ripping up GM crops. I'm also sorry that I helped start the anti-GM movement back in the 90s, and that I thereby assisted in demonising an important technological option which can and should be used to benefit the environment. As an environmentalist, and someone who believes that everyone in this world has a right to a healthy and nutritious diet of their choosing, I could not have chosen a more counterproductive path, and I now regret it completely. So I guess you'll be wondering, following on from what Mike said, what happened between 1995 and now that made me not only change my mind, but actually come here and stand before you today and admit it? Well, the answer is fairly simple. I discovered science, and in the process, I hope, I'm becoming a better environmentalist.
Now, of course, you're not talking about GM, the car company. You are talking about genetically modified food there. And it was, I think, an astonishing thing for many people to hear those words coming out of your mouth. So I wonder what the reaction was to that speech.
The reaction was immediate and very profound, and it surprised me enormously. I made that speech just to a conference of 300 or so farmers in Oxford. This is a conference that happens every year, and it's been the first time I've been invited to speak to it. And I just thought I'd tell the truth about how my views have evolved on this issue and share it with them. And in fact, there were probably some people in the audience whose crops I had destroyed during my sort of earlier career as an anti-GMO activist. And within literally just a matter of a couple of hours, the speech started going all around on Twitter and Facebook, and basically went viral on the internet to the extent that it brought down my website that evening. And since then, that video, or at least the impressions of that video, have probably gone up to 500,000 or more. I've even stopped counting. So it was just one of those things that caught people's attention. I don't think it's because I'm particularly interesting. I think there's just a zeitgeist out there where people are ready for a change of heart on this issue in terms of what general public opinion is.
Well, let's see if we can understand why that change of heart took place. Tell us why you were against genetically modified foods to begin with.
Well, this was 15 or so years ago. Back in about 1995, 96 was when I got involved in the issue. And that's really when it began to hit the big time. I wouldn't claim credit for that. I was one participant amongst many in a movement which was essentially leaderless. And we did do direct action, going out in the middle of the night and destroying crops. We did some of that kind of things in the daytime as well, with a lot of media coverage and a lot of press attention. And it was also quite a remarkable coalition of kind of the right and the left, to go back to your previous discussion. So on the right, we had the tabloid newspapers talking about frankenfoods, and on the left, we had the environmental movement worrying about big corporations and the patenting of life. So it was one of those things that kind of caused a perfect storm and was incredibly successful, I would say. And I did say it was the most successful campaign I've ever been involved with. It's just a shame that it was pretty much anti-science, and it was focused on doing the wrong thing. And I think in retrospect, it's done harm. But, and that this is an important technology which can be used for the good of the environment. But I didn't know that at the time. And, I've changed my mind because facts that I've seen them have changed as well.
Well, help us understand that. What were some of the most important facts that helped your thinking evolve on this issue?
Well, back then we didn't know whether GMOs would be safe or not. And so you can now say that something like 2 to 3 trillion meals have been eaten now containing genetically modified organisms of one way or another. And there's been no substantiated case of harm at all. So in that sense, it's safer than organic food, where, of course, there have been various outbreaks of bacterial contamination, which are traced to the organic food chain. So I think it's time we got a better sense of risk and benefit for this. Also, the news is in pretty strongly that where GM crops have been deployed, even where they've increased herbicide use in certain areas, they've decreased insecticide use. And so overall, the amount of toxins that are being put on farmland are quite radically down. They also allow the increased use of no-till farming, which is good for carbon and water retention in the soil. And there's a lot of GMOs in the pipeline, which can increase nitrogen use efficiency, and also being developed in the public sector. So to get away from the big corporations aspect here, food fortification, which can be really useful to poorer people who are lacking micronutrients. This really seems to me to be a very important technology for food security as well as for environmental protection when we're going forward to a world with now 7 billion and soon to be 9.5 or so billion people by mid-century. So my point really is we can't foreclose any technological options which could be useful, certainly not on the basis of the kind of misinformation which I was involved in spreading 15 years ago.
So if I understand you, you have simply followed the facts. The facts have changed, and so your thinking has changed as well. And I wonder, as you have tried to explain that new viewpoint to some of your colleagues from the old days who you may have been on those direct action campaigns with, how have they reacted to this?
People have reacted in a variety of ways, it's safe to say. There's been some negative reactions from people who I was involved with then. A lot of them still don't want to speak publicly. What's really interested me, actually, is the reaction I've had from scientists, many of whom are quite well known around the world, the top people in molecular biology, who many of them emailed me straight after that and said, I don't know why you're getting all this attention, because we've been saying this for 10, 15 years, which was one thing which was interesting. And also people said, if you're getting a bag full of hate mail, that's welcome to my world. We've been also experiencing this for a very long time. But I think there is a change of opinion here globally, and I watched my speech go around the world in different languages, in Argentina, in Chile, in Australia, and all sorts of places. Huge amounts of media coverage and very positive. And I think actually people have realized that it's a bit like the anti-vaccine movement, that there wasn't the science underpinning the concerns about GMOs, and that a lot of it has been shown to be false in retrospect, and that it is doing harm because it's precluding the use of an important technology. And the test, I think, for the environmental movement and for many of us out there is whether we can change our minds now that we know the facts on this issue, and whether whether our facts our mental frames can actually accommodate science on this issue.
So that's genetically modified organisms. I wonder if there are any other issues in the scientific realm that you once had a position on. You have heard some new facts, and therefore you have changed your views on that also. Anything else?
Well, certainly I've changed my views on nuclear power, but that's more in response to the increasing urgency of climate change. And I've written 2 books on climate change, really trying to bring awareness to the issue. And I started work on this way back in 2000. The most recent one I wrote was called 6 Degrees, and that was published in 2007, 2008. And, we simply can't solve this problem with the technology prescription which is put out there by most people who are concerned about it. The Al Gores of this world, who say that we can provide all the energy we need with just wind and solar and efficiency. And frankly, that's delusional. I'm a big supporter of wind and solar, but they're less than 1% of global energy at the moment. We're not going to bring them up to 80 to 100% without a lot more low carbon energy coming from other sources. Hydroelectricity can be part of that, but the only one that's just really scalable and can be deployed to the kind of enormous amounts of energy generation that we need is nuclear. And it's also relatively environmentally benign, again, contrary to most people's perceptions on this.
Okay, just finally, before I get Michael Shermer to make a comment on all of what he's just heard, you heard him talk about the strains of anti-science on the left, and you'll forgive the pun, but is he right about the left in what he says?
From my perspective, I don't see it so much as a left-right issue. We don't have the sort of same Republicans-Democrats thing here. The political right is, certainly in terms of the Conservative Party here in the UK, is strongly in favour of dealing with climate change, and so there's no denial. There's not much denialism, although it does tend to be more of a creature of the right in the way that he identifies. But yes, I think left and right, or environmentalists and non-environmentalists, have got things wrong here, and I think both need to be challenged. The problem often is that environmentalists are quite self-righteous, and I have fallen into that trap too, in terms of taking the moral high ground. And once you've done that, and then you find out that you're wrong, it's actually more difficult to back down, perhaps, than a more humble position to start with.
Michael Shermer, you've been listening to this discussion. What's your view on what you've just heard about the evolution of Mark's views?
Well, first of all, Mark, congratulations for making a switch like that. That takes a lot of intellectual courage. I happen to agree with you, but even somebody who doesn't agree with you has at least got to acknowledge that, to the best of your knowledge, you made the switch because of data, because of science, and that's really what science is all about. It is changing your mind when there is new evidence, and I think that takes a lot of intellectual courage. Almost nobody does that. Very hard for any of us to do that. Another thought I had, I mentioned earlier Jonathan Haidt's 5 moral foundations. One of his 5 is purity and sanctity, which on the Republican side of things, conservative side of things, it usually deals with the human body, the purity and sanctity of sex, and don't drink too much, don't smoke, don't carouse, and so forth. And that's considered to be sort of a religious, spiritual kind of purity and sanctity. But I see it on the left as well, that the environment, the air, the water, the food, there's this sort of almost at same levels of conservatives on the left of this concern for purity and sanctity of the natural environment. And I mean, on the one hand, who wouldn't be in favor of cleaner air and cleaner water and so forth? But on the other hand, there's 7 billion of us. And so instead of a kind of subtle, let's go back to Paleolithic days of hunter-gatherers where we lived in eco-harmony with the environment, which was never true anyway, let's go forward and see what we can do technologically, scientifically, politically, and economically to solve these problems, rather than just being, against them all across the board. With each of the different energy sources that Mark was just talking about, wind and solar and hydroelectric, nuclear, and so forth, they all have downsides. It's not hard to find a study here or there that says, well, it's bad because of this or it's bad because of that. The question is, what's the overall balance of things? And in my view, the science shows that overall things have been getting a lot better over the last half century. And I don't know why environmentalists on the left don't take credit for that. I mean, they really launched the environmental movement that really should be given credit for a lot of these changes. And I think it might in part be an artifact of just, I hate to sound crude about it, but fundraising. If you want to raise money for your nonprofit, you can't say things are getting better and we don't need your help as much. You always have to wave the red meat and say, things are bad and getting worse, and we need you to dig deep into your pockets, get that checkbook out. Because those enemy on the right, they're trying to ruin the environment, and they hate the natural environment and so on. But in fact, things really are much better than they were half a century ago.
Okay, Michael and Mark, stand by 1 second because we're going to bring one more voice into our discussion. On the line now in Washington, D.C. is Chris Mooney. He's a science journalist and the author of The Republican Brain, The Science of Why They Deny Science and Reality. And Chris, we welcome you to TVO tonight, and I wonder if you could start by telling us, you've written a couple of books actually about the right-wing views on science. How would you characterize those views, just for starters?
Well, in the United States now especially, we have really systematic conservative denial of science, and it isn't just science, it is reality. I've listened a lot to what's been said so far, and I agree that there are many problems on the left, and GMOs are certainly a good example. So it is true that on the left you find some denial of science. However, on the right it's much more monolithic, and in fact the data you put up actually showed that, partly showed that. There's data that hasn't been talked about. For instance, the sociologist Gordon Goshat published a study in the American Sociological Review about a year ago where he looked at polling data from the General Social Survey about trust in science. And he broke the data down by liberal, moderate, and conservative. This is US data. And found that conservatives had dropped a lot in how much they trust science, and they were much lower than liberals and lower than moderates who had not dropped over a 30-year time period. So it isn't the case that both sides are doing it. It is the case that you get some on both sides, but it's much more monolithic on the right, it's much more serious on the right. And so I could take issue, I like Michael Shermer a lot, but I could take issue with a lot of the things that he said. And actually also his interpretations of Jonathan Haidt's research, which I'd be glad to talk about.
Well, let's just, before you go there, we did bring these numbers up earlier, but since you've just referenced them, let's bring them up again if we can. The views on climate change and evolution, which, as you do point out, if we can bring that red and blue bar graph up one more time, that graphic pretty much reflects what you just said, Chris, which is that there is a great deal more skepticism on the right wing of the political spectrum, even as you go further right, as I guess the Tea Party reflects, than there would be among the general public or among Democrats as well. And I guess I need a little background here to understand why science became as polarized as it did, I guess in politics generally, but particularly on the right wing of the political spectrum. How come?
Well, I believe there's an inherent dynamic where science is always going to challenge conservatives more than liberals because science presents new ideas, new ways of thinking about things. And some of the psychological research that we should talk about more suggests that liberals are the people who are embracing of change and open to new ideas and new experiences. That sort of defines the liberal personality. And we have a huge amount of research correlating that correlating liberalism with the personality trait of openness to ideas and experiences, and then conservatism is the opposite. So science upsets the apple cart, and nobody likes to have the apple cart upset, but conservatives like it a lot less, and they tend to double down, and liberals tend to adapt more easily.
Well, conservatives, of course, would say that liberals are more enamored with the status quo because liberals control the media, liberals control most of the levers of government, and it takes some good old-fashioned small c conservative values to sort of bring in what we called in this province about 15 years ago a common sense revolution, which is hardly status quo, it's revolutionary. What would you say about that?
That's an objection that's commonly made, and it really depends on what the revolution is doing. If the revolution is hearkening back to a prior golden age where things were supposed to have been better, then it actually is still conservative.
Okay, when we look at some of the views held on the question of evolution, could the problem of anti-scientism be related to increased religiosity in public life?
Maybe partly related, but I think that what's going on here, and again, this is why this is more of a right-wing thing, is that the conservative psychology is associated with a need for certainty, need for fixed beliefs that don't change, and so you find that sense of security and that sense of consolation in religiosity, and evolution challenges all of that. And so you double down on the religiosity. Conservatives score higher on a trait called the need for cognitive closure, which is the need to have fixed beliefs and to stick with them. There's a lot of research on that. So it's going to be more on the right when it comes to destabilizing people's worldviews that are grounded in religion, that give them certainty and that they maintain by faith. Michael Shermer pointed out that there's something that he calls cognitive creationism, which is, first of all, it's going to be a smaller subset. I mean, the conservatives who would reject all evolution are clearly going to reject the evolution of the human brain as well. So again, this shows how the right is worse than the left, if you think about what his argument means. But also, you know, the people who claim that it's absurd, that we're somehow a blank slate, that our brains didn't evolve, but our bodies did, that did exist on the left, at least in some form, in the 60s, 70s, 80s, especially with the attacks on E.O. Wilson. I think it's much less of an issue now. I'm a liberal. I write for Mother Jones magazine. I write about the psychology and biology of ideology, taking an evolutionary psychology perspective, and I can tell you it's quite welcome there.
Let me get some feedback to you. First from Mark and then from Michael on the issue of the problem of anti-scientism being related to increased religiosity in public life. Mark, what would you say on that?
I don't know about increased religiosity, but I do know about Mother Jones magazine, who wrote quite a critical piece of my talk on GMOs. So I don't actually think that the left, or certainly the Green left, is as open-minded as maybe Chris is saying. And I think possibly one of the reasons why they're more enthusiastic about climate change is that they think it requires the kinds of things that they're already in favor of, which is more sort of government intervention, and more public spending, perhaps. Essentially the sort of smaller, more decentralized energy approaches, which Greens or even pre-Greens have been arguing for a lot longer than climate change has been around. So my worry then is that triggered a kind of backlash from the right, who didn't want to see more government intervention, didn't want to see small-scale kind of, back to the lander type approaches, who then responded by denying even the scientific reality of climate change. And a very political debate was had in these kinds of weird scientific terms. So I do actually think that it's important for all of us to challenge ourselves all of the time, and for us to remain open-minded and to accept contrary views and even contrarian views as being a legitimate part of the debate, and look at them in terms of the evidence rather than rejecting things because somebody is from the left or somebody is from the right in a sort of a priori sense.
Michael, your view on whether or not we have more anti-scientism going on because we have more religiosity in public life?
Well, for sure, I think that the Republican or conservative rejection of evolution is not really an anti-science attitude. It's a belief that the theory, that particular theory, threatens their religious beliefs, because they're not concerned about plate tectonics and geology and the germ theory of disease and tons of other science Republicans fully accept. So it's really not anti-science across the board. It's anti-science where they believe it's threatening something they consider to be more important, their particular faith or religion. So that's why I wrote a book called Why Darwin Matters, in which I try to convince conservatives, look, you don't really have to be threatened by evolution. It's not a threat. In fact, if anything, it supports your particular view of human nature, that we have a human nature, that it's sinful by nature. By sinful, I mean something different than the religious view, that we have a dark side, a competitive side, a bellicose side, an evil side, as well as our good side. And that comports actually fairly well, the Darwinian worldview with the conservative worldview. I think it's a matter of trying to convince Republicans that we should always accept what the science says, regardless of whether it feels threatening or not. Now, as to Chris's citing of that paper, that study on how conservatives are less openness to experience, he's referring there to the big 5 personality dimensions. There's 5 of them. Openness to experiences is one of them, and that's true. Conservatives tend to be score lower on openness to experience and change. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. We have to remember that it depends on the context. If a century ago, the pro-change, pro-science thing to support was eugenics and social Darwinism, which at the time was led more by progressives and liberals and opposed by conservatives. And then it flipped after the Second World War, and then eugenics got a bad name. But that was initially led by a more progressive element that embraced the science. And so we always have to be careful that we're not using science to support some particular belief. I was just reading a book called Fatal Self-Deception about justification of slavery in the 18th and 19th centuries, using the documents and books and papers and articles and essays and commentaries and sermons by people that were pro-slavery. And they had all the great arguments and data on their side, and yet no one would ever make those arguments today. Same thing with eugenics. You can find tons of articles supporting eugenics and social Darwinism, just steeped in science and data and charts and graphs, and yet no one would make those arguments today. So as much as I love science and am pro-science, we always have to be careful that we have a reality check it somewhere along the line, that we're not talking ourselves into something we just want to be true.
Sure. Because
anybody using the confirmation bias, employing the confirmation bias, where you look for and find confirming evidence for what you already believe, and you ignore the disconfirming evidence. We all do this. We have to be careful not to do that in the name of something we also believe that's not really well founded in science.
I want to give Chris a chance to speak to this, because I think, Chris, in your book, The Republican Brain, you talk about motivated reasoning. Is that some of what we're just referring to here?
Yeah, it goes by different names, but basically, Michael knows a lot about this. The science of bias is becoming quite advanced, and we're learning about all of the different blind spots that human beings have. Motivated reasoning is just basically the idea that ideas strike one emotionally before they strike one rationally because you have prior commitments. And the emotional system, which is an evolved system in the brain, it actually then kind of organizes how you think about these things once you're conscious and thinking, and so you actually call up all the reasons to not accept the ideas that strike you emotionally as an affront, which you already have ready to go. And so this actually dovetails with what Michael just said about people having all this data to support really wrong-headed ideas. That's still true today if you just look at some of the global warming denial literature. And what's going on is that they're wedded to the idea that global warming isn't real for ideological reasons. And then you just come up with the arguments. And the most insidious thing is that the smarter and more informed you are, the more biased you are in this process.
Let me read something that was in Harper's Magazine last month. And Mark, I'll get you to react to this first, but then we'll hear what the other fellows have to say as well. Here it goes. Unvaccinated children, according to a 2004 analysis of CDC data, are more likely than undervaccinated children to be white and to live in households with an income of $75,000 or more. Their mothers are more likely to be married and college educated. Undervaccinated children, meaning children who have received some but not all of their recommended immunizations, are more likely to be black, to have younger unmarried mothers, and to live in poverty. Okay, what do we infer from this? Mark, you first.
Well, that's actually probably quite a subtle distinction between unvaccinated and undervaccinated. Unvaccinated, I presume to mean from that, people from families whose parents have actually chosen not to vaccinate their children. And there is a strong movement towards that end, and it's come quite strongly, I think, from the left, as Michael said earlier on. Undervaccinated probably means where medical care isn't reaching families and needs so much, and that's probably more of a sociological phenomenon. So I think if we look at where the elements of choice are lying here, families or parents who are choosing not to vaccinate their children and who are therefore putting their own children and, in fact, other children who are not vaccinated for other reasons, like they have lower immunity or so on and so forth, they then lose herd immunity, as it's called, and we're seeing outbreaks of measles and other diseases which had supposedly been banished before, which are now affecting children. I think that's a direct result of a kind of anti-science movement. And the vaccination thing is interesting because it does intersect to some extent with the anti-GMO left-wing movement, and also concerns about mercury in vaccines and about autism and stuff like that. And actually, I think what's happened is that there's been a loss of trust in sort of scientific authority. And so you can have any number of scientists standing up and saying, look, there's nothing in that, you should vaccinate your children, it's better for their health. But people simply don't believe them. And you see this again also with GMOs. It comes down to a variety of different conspiracy theories about how scientists are falsifying data, about how big corporations are somehow overseeing everything. And in fact, there's a lot in common with the climate change denialist scene as well, because there it's the governments who are falsifying data with the UN, but also in league with scientists again. So both sides think that scientists are falsifying data. And it's really interesting to see. But ultimately, these come down to conspiracy theories. You've got to believe that literally hundreds, thousands of scientists are somehow in collusion to pull the wool over people's eyes. And it's extraordinary, actually, how both sides of the political divide make that kind of sort of fallacious reasoning.
Chris, can I get your take on it?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked this. So this demonstrates something that I called in the book the smart idiot effect, where sometimes, people who know more are actually more wrong. And that's what you're getting with these sort of left-wing elites who won't vaccinate their kids. So that's what that study is capturing. I think there are some important details that have to be kept in mind with respect to the vaccine autism issue. So I suspect, like our other guests, that it is more of a left-wing thing, but polling data in the US that has attempted to show this is actually generally showing more of a distribution in terms of ideology and who doesn't trust vaccines. So that's something that's important to keep in mind. Nevertheless, I think it does appeal to some of the left-wing moral values that Michael cited, including distrust of corporations, which is rooted in left-wing egalitarianism, and there's Jonathan Haidt's research again. So I do think that it lives there. But then the other thing that's important to keep in mind here, and this is again why the left and the right are different with respect to science. They're different because the anti-vaccine idea, which appealed to left-wing emotions, came to the fore, and it was eviscerated by scientists and the left, okay? It did not become mainstream or accepted. Now, it still lives on because there's closed-mindedness out there and there's people who are emotionally wedded to it, and autism is an incredibly emotional issue, and it got tied up in that. But nevertheless, the idea was pilloried and destroyed and did not go mainstream. It is not an accepted left position, unlike climate change denial, which is a mainstream conservative position in the United States that affects policy at the highest levels. It's very, very different.
Forgive me, Michael, this seems to turn conventional wisdom on its ear, though, where the whiter, richer, and better educated you are, certainly in the area of vaccines here, suggests that you're turning your back more on science. How can that be?
Yeah, again, I think it's important to remember context. The progressives are not just anti-science across the board. It depends on that particular context. And again, control. I don't know that particular study. I haven't seen if they control for income or not. But what comes to mind is Boulder, Colorado, a very affluent community, which is one of these areas where they breached herd immunity and saw sort of an outbreak of measles and things like that. I think there were a couple of communities in Oregon, like near Portland, I believe, that did the same thing. Another upscale, socioeconomically upscale community. So, but my sense is that where for the right, religion and faith is where their emphasis is. On the left, nature is almost a religious sentiment, a feeling that the more pure you are, the less you mess with the air, the water, food, drugs, your human body, things like that, the better. And so vaccinations, I mean, it is starting back in the 1890s when Alfred Russel Wallace, the co-discoverer of natural selection with Darwin, led the anti-vaccination movement in England. This was his argument. You're injecting people with really toxins, with the very thing we want to prevent. It just seems counterintuitive. It does take a lot of science to overcome the emotional intuition about that. And so that one's been around actually for more than a century now. And then one final point to come back to this on the left and right. There are a lot of people working on solving global warming through bottom-up market solutions, like concrete that absorbs carbon dioxide right out of the air, and let's build buildings out of and driveways and streets and so on out of this concrete that absorbs carbon dioxide. And there's like 100 examples like that. But for some reason, the left doesn't seem to embrace those. They kind of just tend to sweep them under the carpet or just ignore them and decry, no, 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 we need top-down government intervention. And this is what I think the right also objects to emotionally. And that's what pushes them toward being anti-science on the global warming issue. It feels like the left doesn't care what the actual solutions are. The left just wants more government. That's what it feels like to the right. I know, because I go to these conferences, like these libertarian right-wing type conferences, and that's the kind of thing and before you know it, they're spinning some wild conspiracy theory that's just ridiculous about the left concocting a fake global warming conspiracy just to impose more government.
Well, let me put this theory out here, Mark.
Of course, this is ridiculous. But
let me try this theory, Mark. Would the anti-GMO folks and the anti-vaccine folks and the anti-big pharma folks trust science a little more if they felt that at the end of the day there wasn't a profit motive for a big corporation enriching itself as the bottom line in this whole discussion?
I think the left would trust the issue more if it wasn't a big corporation thing, and the right would trust the issues more if it wasn't a big government thing. And so just to go back to what Mike was saying, the reason why the right is suspicious of climate change as an issue in terms of its very existence is because it's clearly a market failure on an enormous proportion of the externality of fossil fuel burning is that you put CO2 into the air, and that's heating up the planet, and that's affecting our common atmosphere. So we've got to talk about issues which are held in common, which are not subject to market rules. Can you bring in a carbon price to internalize that externality and make it subject to market rules? Well, that requires government intervention. And so already you've got a very politicized argument. But I think the other aspect here is about technology. And perhaps this does come down to a certain extent to the naturalistic fallacy and whether people think we need to be more in harmony with nature in a general sense. But I've been criticized for being interested in techno fixes. So there's some types of technology, big centralized technologies, which are deployed by corporations, which are seen as being inherently suspicious. So GMOs are associated with Monsanto, which is one corporation which is really sort of a lightning rod for everyone's fantasies about what's evil and bad in the world. And it's ignored the fact that GMOs can be used to enhance food security and to bring vitamin A, to give one example, in rice in parts of the world where literally hundreds of thousands of children are dying from vitamin A deficiency. We can deploy that in staple foods using GMOs, but somehow that's always brought back to Monsanto. So it's very difficult to get people to shake off their preconceptions and their frames for how they deal with these issues, and trying to get them to see them in a less ideological way.
Chris, you look like you want to weigh in on this.
Well, no, I agree. I mean, if the left is going to be wrong about something factual, or especially something scientific, it's going to be because they distrust a corporation, or it's going to be because they think that some minority or underprivileged group is being hurt. Okay? That's where the left's values are, because they are egalitarian and they are communitarian. They want to care for everybody, and they want everybody to be treated equal. And they view big corporations as unegalitarian and as also harming the weak and those who can't protect themselves. So all the emotional alarm bells go off, and absolutely they've gone off towards Monsanto, and that explains a lot of the anti-GMO resistance. If you look at fracking, it was because Halliburton was involved. I think they actually originally invented the technology. That would have to be checked. But anyway, it just starts there, and then you get a whole swath of the left willing to distrust it. Again, I think there's a different dynamic because the left is allied with scientists. Scientists tend to be overwhelmingly liberal. We've got polling data on that. So the left also has to attack its own friends if the scientists are saying, actually, GMOs are perfectly safe. Or actually, it's not the fracking process that's contaminating water, it's just drilling. Things like that. You end up having to have fights with your own allies, scientists, which makes it a lot harder. The left is also just much less obedient to authority, and so it doesn't tend to line up behind one single position. So left and right are not the same, but these are the areas where left-wing biases make themselves felt.
You may have partially answered this next question already in that last answer, but let me try anyway in case there's a little more ground to be explored here. If this sort of anti-corporatist streak is part of the explanation why the left is skeptical about some aspects of science nowadays, who does the right wing blame, or what does the right wing blame when it comes to faulting science or disbelieving science?
Well, I think we've already heard it. I mean, it's government. So first of all, on the right, you have this individualist streak, which is associated mainly with libertarianism, but a lot of conservatives who wouldn't call themselves libertarian per se are very individualistic. And basically, the individualist philosophy is, you get ahead or you fall behind in this world based upon your own merits, and a fair system is one in which that is allowed to happen, and you don't interfere and you don't tilt the playing field. Okay? So government is then perceived as interfering and tilting the playing field, and it can do no good, at least in the extreme view of this philosophy. And so then things associated with government, as we've heard, including regulating emissions of carbon, end up being automatically bad. And so that is, but then the whole conservative thing with religiosity is different, although you do find, sort of conservative Christians who also have this free market view a lot of the time, so you find a lot of the overlapping.
Michael, I know you're not an expert in all of the different education systems from all of the countries around the world that we have been talking about so far tonight, but I wonder whether you believe the education system does have some responsibility in the anti-science streak that we're talking about.
Oh, for sure. Of course, we like education and teachers to be unbiased, but as Chris referenced earlier, scientists are overwhelmingly liberal, and not just scientists. Across the board, virtually all professors, with the exception of economists, are lean left, far left, actually definitely vote Democrat and so on. Study after study shows that. So the idea that, say, our college students are getting a fair and balanced, if I can use that phrase from Fox News, a fair treatment on these issues, they're not, of course. And I recall a big brouhaha about 2 years ago. So to shift from education to the media, when the Richard Dawkins Foundation, they give this Atheist of the Year award out, and so they gave it to Bill Maher, the comedian Bill Maher, and because of his movie Religulous, which is a very pro-atheist, make fun of religion, and a lot of atheists love the movie, but they objected to him getting this Richard Dawkins award because Richard Dawkins stands for science and reason, and Bill Maher is so anti-science and anti-reason on so many of these issues like vaccination and so forth that again, in education, media, just all of a sudden we start bumping up against sometimes our own people, as Chris said, you're going against your own folks. It's like, we love Bill Maher. He's great, except for these particular issues where he's not so great. So we're all multifaceted. We all, can have conflicts within our own brains. We're multifaceted in that regard.
And I'm very jealous of him because he gets to swear a lot more than I do on this program. But be that as it may, we're down to our last few minutes here. And I want to go to Mark on this next question. We had a city councillor from the city of Windsor, Ontario, on the program last night who was telling us that after 50 years, their city council has decided, and this is a relatively big city in the province of Ontario, they decided after 50 years to take the fluoride out of the water because a number of groups came forward and said they wanted it out. And I wonder if you could help us understand what you think the stakes are if we don't, as a society, I don't like that expression, but okay, be that as it may, if we don't resolve this apparent widespread skepticism that many of us have with science nowadays.
Yeah, and fluoridation in the water seems to me to be about as settled as a scientific issue can be. It's very clear that it's beneficial for dental health, and it's particularly beneficial if it's done on a very large scale, so it's in the water supply, so nobody can avoid it. And it's like vaccination there. Again, that's an issue of us all needing to participate in something in common in order to protect everyone's health, because if enough people start opting out of vaccination, then herd immunity is affected, and you start getting outbreaks of some of these nasty diseases which shouldn't be there at all in the modern world. So I think it's important to keep not just to keep an open mind, but actually to respect the level of consensus which does come through in science. And obviously, if you're cherry picking and you're exercising confirmation bias, you can always come up with a few scientific papers published in peer-reviewed journals which say, GMOs are harmful or something, or fluoride in water is harmful or whatever. But when there's a consensus where 99.9% of scientists are saying, look, this is safe and this is beneficial and this is important and climate change is real, then those are the things you've got to look at, because we're all lay people. None of us are scientists doing original work in these issues. And sooner or later, we have to trust the experts and see what the experts are saying in terms of an overwhelming majority and basically go with that.
Chris, let me give you the last 30 seconds to talk about the potential consequences if we don't figure out this anti-science-ism in our society right now.
Well, they're huge, mainly because we're not dealing with global warming, and that is going to be a global disaster that we are going to regret for all time. So how could it be bigger than that? But we're not going to deal with this problem until we realize where it comes from. And that is, we have to understand the emotions and the different personality profiles and the different motivations of the left and the right and what actually drives science abuse. And we got to get out of the Enlightenment mindset that people reason their way to truth somehow. And if we just debate it, people will end up being more knowledgeable, more correct. It doesn't work that way. And as long as we keep pretending it does, the issues aren't going to go away.
Gentlemen, I want to thank the three of you for coming on tonight for a most fascinating discussion, starting in Los Angeles, California, with Michael Shermer of Skeptic Magazine, Mark Linus on Skype in Oxford, England, the author of The God Species, and then Chris Mooney in Washington, D.C., author of The Republican Brain. Thanks so much to the three of you.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.